If you're stuck in a job that no longer challenges you, but you keep showing up because it's fine and it's predictable? What if you're dragging throughout your day, not because you're overwhelmed, but because you're bored out of your mind? Does that sound familiar? Burnout and boredom can look nearly identical on the surface. Low energy, zero motivation, feeling disconnected. But the reasons behind them and the solutions are completely different. If you mistake boredom for burnout, you might take time off and just come back just as unmotivated. But if you mistake burnout for boredom, you might try to chase more excitement and end up making things worse. We're going to talk about how to spot the difference and what each one is trying to tell you about your career. Welcome to Control Your Career. I'm Julia Toothacre, your strategic career consultant, and I'm glad that you're here. This season, we are digging into real career challenges that leave professionals feeling stuck, drained, and just unsure of what to do. We're going to be talking about something that shows up in a lot of my coaching conversations today, which is figuring out whether you are burnt out, bored, or maybe both. It's not always easy to tell, but the difference does matter. And knowing what you're actually dealing with is the first step towards fixing it. So let's get into it. First, I want to let you know that burnout has become very much a catch-all term anytime that we are just not feeling it in the career or we feel like something's off. And I think that's just because we've over-normalized the use of the term burnout. And that's part of why I wanted to do this episode. I wanted people to be able to identify what is legitimate burnout and then what is going to be boredom. I think this is part of the clarity piece that I like to work through with my clients. So as you know, we are using the Control Your Career process to work through all of that. But before we get into the actual process as it relates to this topic, I want to do some clarification between these two so that we understand what we're looking at. So first, let's talk about the different signs. So signs for burnout are going to be chronic fatigue, even after resting. This was something that I went through in my career where I was in a season of burnout and I would come home at night and completely crash. And on the weekends, I would also crash. I never wanted to go anywhere. I never wanted to do anything. I was perpetually tired. My body was tired. My mind was tired. That is a true state of burnout. You might even develop a short temper. There might be some emotional disconnection. I remember during that time, my empathy was very low because I had such a short fuse because I was so tired. And then that also leads to brain fog, which I know brain fog can happen in a lot of different scenarios, especially depending on age or medications you're on and all of that. But when we're talking about chronic fatigue as it relates to burnout, then brain fog does become a part of that as well. Something else to consider with burnout is dreading work every day. Now, we all dread work sometimes. You're not always going to want to go to work, but if it is consistent, if it is every day, and again, if you couple it with that fatigue, if you couple it with, an emotional detachment, now we're getting into burnout. And the other one that I think can get confused in other contexts is resentment. We really start to resent our positions. We really start to resent the organization or our manager. So we're feeling used. We're feeling unsupported. We feel like what we're doing is never enough. And then that just spirals everything out of control. So those are the burnout signs. Let's talk about boredom signs because I don't think that this gets talked about enough. And so I want to make sure that we're differentiating between the two. So boredom looks like not being challenged at work or stimulated. So everything feels repetitive. Now, that's not to say that you don't like work that's repetitive. So some personality types do want repetitive work, or you're in a season where repetitive work is something that is good for you. So you have to differentiate between that. But if you're somebody that really likes the challenge, they want to learn new things, and you're not getting that, that can be a sign of boredom. Also, and this is hard to explain to my clients sometimes, but this idea of feeling just very flat and very indifferent. And it's not, you're not exhausted, you're not tired, you're just indifferent. Like you really just don't care either way. And that usually leads back to boredom. And similar to that is you're going through the motions. You show up, you go to work, and it feels just almost like you're on a hamster wheel and you're not engaged with the work that you're doing. And this can happen a lot, especially if we have positions where we're not really interacting with people. A lot of times that can happen because that's where that repetitiveness comes in as well, but also just a disengagement from the work that we're doing. And then also, you're craving something different. And this is where we end up making rash decisions. So either we quit our job or we get a new job before we've really thought this through. But you're basically looking for a shakeup. You're looking for a challenge. You're seeking out something more meaningful. And so again, I see clients with that all the time. They know that something's not right and they need a change. And it's not burnout. They just need something different because they're bored in their position or they've outgrown their position and they're not in a situation where they can promote or do anything within the organization that they are in. So why do we confuse these two? Because it does happen a lot. I'm sure now that I've gone through the different signs between the two, I'm sure some of you are like, oh, maybe I am just bored. It might not be burnout. It could also be a little bit of both. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. But why do we confuse the two? Well, first of all, most professionals are so busy that they don't have time to reflect. That's usually why people come to somebody like me, a coach, a mentor, something like that, because you need to be able to take time to reflect on what is going on. You feel something, something is off. And so we have to take time to reflect and figure out what it is that's going on. I think too, just in the culture that we're in, and this is predominantly in the US kind of corporate working culture, we're really conditioned to think that if we feel off, if something doesn't feel right, that it's some kind of failure, that we have failed. It is our fault. It is something that we have done. It's not necessarily something where we go, oh, I'm feeling off. Let me inquire about that. Let me do some deep reflection. We automatically go to, I did something wrong. And I think that's a narrative we definitely need to change. And then also, burnout has become very socially acceptable. And I think that the reason for this is because we didn't understand what it was before. And so many people were in a state of burnout, and now we're overcorrecting with it and we're applying it to everything anytime that we are just tired. And so that's not the case. Burnout is actually very, very serious. And when I have clients that are going through it, I usually recommend that they're seeing a counselor or a therapist alongside their work with me if I believe that it is that serious, because it comes with so many other like comorbidities basically and issues that can arise if you are in like a deep burnout state. And look, most work environments honestly are boring. They're boring, but then there is this state of overwhelm that they create because they think that everything is on fire. And the reality is, unless you work in a hospital, like you're not saving lives in your corporate job. And I know you've heard that phrase before, but that's the reality. And even though some people make it seem that way, it's not that way. And so I think that's where we have to really take a step back and look at the situation that we are in so that we can make good decisions for ourselves about how to move forward if we're in this situation of trying to manage, is it burnout? Is it boredom? Is it a little bit of both? So let's step into the control your career framework to think about this. Because remember, we're trying to get some clarity. We're trying to understand where we are. So we looked at burnout signs and we looked at boredom signs. So let's dig deeper into who you are. So stage one with realistic reality, we are always going to look at what is the truth of the situation. This process is so helpful when we're looking at the difference between boredom and burnout, because again, burnout is so serious. When we're looking at this topic, we want to make sure that we are looking at it appropriately. We want to make sure that we are assigning the right level of weight to it. And so one of the things that we need to look at is energy, and not energy in your job, but really energy outside of work. This was something that I mentioned before about how I felt during my burnout state. And so you really want to evaluate that for yourself. Are you okay on the weekends, but maybe during the week it's a little stressful because you're thinking about the next day? But you hit the weekend, you hit Friday night and you're ready to go. You are not thinking about work at all. It might be boredom instead of burnout. But if you are just perpetually tired, even on the weekends, and you don't want to do anything, that's when it becomes a burnout state. Also consider what changes have happened. And a lot of times this is related to the workplace, but it can also be in personal life. When it comes to this topic, it's usually going to be workplace related. Has your workload changed? I know a lot of organizations are doing layoffs or they're restructuring. So what does your workload look like now compared to a year ago or 2 years ago? What's going on with leadership? Do you have a good relationship with your manager? Managers, I find, are one of the main reasons that people go through burnout, because uh, they're not attached to the employee. They don't understand what the employee is going through, and it just creates a really bad situation. Also, what is larger leadership doing? Have things changed? Are they creating an environment that doesn't feel safe for you? That can also lead to burnout. Has your schedule shifted? Has something happened in your personal life? Are there other expectations? We've talked about caregiving before. If you have caregiving responsibilities outside of work, that feeling and that exhaustion can carry into work, and it can create a state of burnout because of what's going on in your personal life. So really evaluate those changes for yourself and understand how they're impacting you and how they're impacting your energy. Look at stressors. So changes are one thing, but then we also have specific stressors that maybe are not consistently happening, but they just activate something. So as most of you know, if you've been following me, we had to put our dog down, and very recently, uh, that was a major stressor, and it's still impacting us, and we still are seeing the effects of that. And I'm sure that we will for a while, because that's a big loss. Similarly, if there's a big deadline at work, so connecting it back to work, that can be a stressor as well. If there's a big account you're trying to land, if there's in your personal life, maybe a toxic relationship situation or something going on with your kids, those are stressors. They're not going to last forever, but they're definitely impacting your energy and they're impacting your mental and emotional space. One of the things to also look at is how you're resting. So are you recovering when you do choose to rest? So if you come home in the evening and you have some time to rest or do something for yourself, like exercise, read, whatever it is, watch TV, do you feel like that is re-energizing you? Do you feel like you are getting something from that that kind of helps the stress melt away or helps everything kind of reset for you? If it's not, and you're still feeling drained consistently, that's the chronic, right? That's that chronic fatigue that we're talking about. And then that leads to burnout, versus if you come home and you can make that transition from work to home and you can kind of leave work at work for the most part, then again, it's likely boredom that you are looking at. So if you haven't figured out already, one of the main things we're looking at is energy and how tired you are and what kind of tired you are. So a lot of times we just throw that word around. I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm tired. Well, I mean, what is making you tired? And is it so chronic that your answer to every question is, I'm tired? Because then again, we want to take a step back. But maybe you're not tired. Maybe you're just bored. Maybe you need something else in your life in order to get you out of this state of really feeling flat, like I talked about before. Then we step into stage 2, which is identity analysis. This is looking at who we are. This is looking at our personal preferences and really understanding specifically in our career, because that's where a lot of this is going to be centered on, is what is happening in your current position. And so you want to look at your alignment with your position and your personality. So are you doing work that is meaningful? Are you doing work that allows you to play into your strengths and who you are? Because if you aren't, and you're constantly fighting and you're constantly feeling like you can't get ahead or you're always behind, that might not be a good match. And that's going to send you into a state of burnout because you feel like you're not good enough and you feel like you can never get ahead. So we want to look at the match there between the position and who you are and make sure that it's a good fit. For a lot of you that are dealing with the boredom side, it's really going to be, is there room for you to be creative in your position, whatever that looks like for you? I'm not talking about artistic creativity, but just creativity in general. Is there room for challenge, growth? Because a lot of times that's what's missing, is we're on the hamster wheel and we need to get off. And so we need some type of challenge to help us keep going. Because if you're just on autopilot, then that can actually be very draining. And again, that leads to the boredom, not necessarily the burnout. Also, let's look at our environment. So what is the environment that you're in? And is that environment helping you? Is it helping you be successful in your work? There are a lot of really toxic environments. You might love the work that you're doing, but the environment that you're doing it in really does not fit for you. And that can look very different for each person. So maybe you're in a situation where there's a lot of people gossiping. Maybe there's a lot of layoffs going on. Maybe, you want to work remote and your company wants you to come back into the office and there's a lot of disagreement about that. And then that can, make everything just feel frustrating. And it's not necessarily burnout again, but it just adds to everything, making you feel frustrated. And then while this doesn't always matter, I find that it comes into play here, which is really connecting your work to what you care about and what matters. Not everybody's going to care about that, but a lot of times when I find that clients are feeling this like misalignment, it's because they're not connected to the work. And so either you have grown out of the work that you're doing, or you just need a change of some kind. I want y'all to remember this from this episode. Burnout is going to come from values violations. Boredom is going to come from misaligned interests. If you get nothing from this episode, that is what I want you to take away, because that is going to be the difference. And then when we look at our energy around those two, that's going to also tell us what the difference is, because there can be some overlap between the two. And so really taking time to reflect on that energy, to reflect on, are my values being, pushed against, and are my interests being misaligned with what I'm doing right now? Now we're going to go into goals. This is stage 3, purpose-driven plan. Now, for the purposes of the episode, I'm going to give you some general goals related to this topic just to help get you started. But at the end of the day, you have to decide the goals that are going to work best for you, for your particular situation. So what really needs to change if you're burned out? What needs to go? What can you take off your plate? What is that values violation that is happening? And can it be fixed in the current situation? If you're bored, what needs to be added? What kind of challenge do you need in order to move forward well? So really try to identify between the two, what is missing and what you need. What would make your work feel more meaningful right now? Because if it is a new project, then that's going to be your goal. I want a new project at work. Then we need to talk to, the manager, see if there's something. If it is that, I will say, make sure that you are directing what it is, or at least asking for a couple different options, and make sure that it is something that interests you. You know your workplace. So finding something that aligns with you is going to be helpful. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's the right thing. So I want to make sure that you understand that. But understanding the goal is really looking at what is missing. And so is your goal growth? Is your goal support? Do you need clarity? Do you need recognition? Do you need flexibility? Whatever that goal is, then you're going to align with that accordingly. So just think about that for your situation, but really look at when it's burnout, what can you take off your plate that's going to help you rest and recover? If you're bored, usually it's something that needs to be added so that you have some kind of challenge or interest. And then we step into stage 4, which is initiating action. And this is, as you know, the step where we lose a lot of people. It's great to set that goal. You're like, yes, this is what I want to do. But what are now the actions that you need to take to make that happen? So I split this into burnout actions and then boredom actions. And again, these are going to be related to whatever your goals are, but I just want to give you some examples to get you kick-started with this process. So for burnout, some actions might be having a conversation around boundaries with your manager. It might be delegating non-essential tasks. How many tasks are we doing that we hate doing? This is actually where AI could be helpful. So look into that as well. Taking time off, planning a vacation where you step away specifically to recharge. That might be a vacation where you go somewhere, but it might not be. It might be that you need to be at home and you need to recharge in whatever way makes sense for you. So figure out what that looks like. And then also asking for help. People who are in a burnout state, they are overwhelmed and they usually need help, but they have a hard time asking for help. So that's a really great action if you find yourself in a burnout state. So for boredom, it's going to look a little bit different. We've talked about some of these. So requesting a new project, maybe even a cross-training opportunity. That might be fun if you are somebody who's interested in potentially moving into a different area of the organization. Looking at your long-term goals, and that could be maybe getting some type of training or certification or something to just keep you interested, but that's going to benefit you in the long term. Also looking at, are there holes or gaps within your current position or organization that you have some creative ideas for, and how can you put those forth or create a proposal for them? Even if they don't get taken, just creating the proposal might be enough for you. And then also talking to your manager about what else you could take on, especially if you do have space in your schedule and want to add something that's a little bit different. All right. And then stage 5, we get into high impact habits. And as always, high impact habits is not always going to be a part of the conversation, but I think it's always helpful to look at habits that you're currently doing or habits that you could be doing, because a lot of times when it comes to the burnout and boredom discussion, again, something's missing or we have too much of something. And so we have to adjust and change some of those habits. One of the things that I love when it comes to habits is writing things down. And so looking at your day and looking at your week and figuring out your energy. How do you feel when you leave work? How do you feel on the weekend? So tracking that energy for a couple of weeks, if you're not quite sure, is going to be really helpful. And that's a short-term habit. You don't have to do that long-term. Just take a couple of weeks to be either aware of yourself or to actually write down how you're feeling when you leave work, how you're feeling when you get to work, and how you're feeling on the weekends. Also, looking at your workload. So understanding, do you have too much? Do you have too little? And what does that mean? And looking at the type of work that it is and how can we adjust that and change that for either situation. I think boundary setting also becomes really important in the habit section because you have to determine for yourself, do you have too many boundaries? Do you have not enough boundaries? What's going on and how can we adjust that to fit this current season of life? I think the thing that we have to remember with this conversation is it's not going to change overnight. It takes time for people to come out of a burnout state. Boredom's a little bit easier to deal with, but can still take some time. Burnout takes time. And you have to recognize that you might have to enlist additional help if that's something that you are going through, either a therapist or a coach, somebody to just help you through that season. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes we think, oh, I don't need help. I can get through it. I can get through it. You're not getting through it. So you might need some additional help in order for you to get through it. So whether you're burned out or bored, the most important thing is to not ignore it. These feelings, they're not going to go away on their own, like I said. And pretending you're fine is only going to stretch you thinner with work and within life. So now that you understand how to tell the difference, you can make decisions that actually move you forward, not just help you cope. So that is something that is really important, especially if we are in a burnout state. A lot of times we are trying to cope with it and we're not trying to get to the root of it in order to move forward. But now you at least have a starting point. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. Share this episode with someone that you think might be going through one of these two things so that they can find that clarity for themselves. And remember, I have a free resource for the Control Your Career process in the blog post and show notes for this episode. Thanks for listening. And as always, keep taking control of your career.